Now, part two, I had to conclude part two at the end of the meditation. So I'm making another video to give some explanation of all that, which will then lead on to the next one, which is seeing what the ego child's up to, really. So I feel it necessary to do this information to follow on from that, so you're a little bit more in the clear about what's going on. So you might need to actually repeat that meditation to get a better result, really, and you need to write things down. So it carries on to say, as part of this study, now is a good time to review what the inner child had to say in relationship to your healing words and your positive attributes. There's going to be a link there between the two aspects, the words you got and also what the inner child was saying to you, or visualization of the inner child. And maybe you need to make some adjustments. I say this because there is another stage whereby your healing words are placed within the centres, and the energy of will gives them power potential. We'll add that part shortly. First, I need to give an understanding concerning the relationship between the soul child and the inner child. Basically, the inner child is the manifestation of the soul child. The soul child is just beyond the periphery of time on the causal plane, and the inner child lives within time. It is the essence of the soul child, the link between the causal and the etheric. The inner child is part of your divine blueprint. Can you see the importance of the inner child? You realise the inner child's always been there as a result of the soul child manifesting the inner child, a part of itself. There is a triangle here: the soul child, the inner child, and the brain consciousness, or you could call it mind or the brain functioning, whatever you like. Notice there is an absence of the personality. The personality is developed via environment, via impression. And as that develops, then the ego appears according to the influences upon the personality. The ego is not the personality, it is part of the personality. Now, if the major influence upon the brain consciousness, for this particular part of the presentation, I refer to the soul child and the inner child, then the development of the personality from their influence would not include the ego. There would be very little development of the ego. The ego keeps you within your wants and desires in the materialistic world. There is nothing wrong in having wants and desires. It all depends upon the identification and the need. Ponder upon that word, need. Now, there are many egos, and you, as a soul child, will have encountered them. The soul itself does not feel the effects of ego force. The inner child does. Also, the brain consciousness starts to think and feel from the developing ego, which then forms a very complicated psychology. I think that's important to realise, the complexity of the ego. There is a child of the ego which overrides within the brain consciousness the inner child, which is a product of the soul child. Look at the world and all the material influence. The force of the ego child needs to be transformed into energy for the expression of the inner and soul child. It is the moving away from the soul child that creates problems. It starts to deplete the divine blueprint, which vitalizes the physical body. The ego child is not real. It is not you, your essence. So there are two things here. The effects of your own developed ego child and the effects upon you of other people's ego child. That's worth giving that some consideration, as we're very sensitive and we pick up things very easy. It can easily display other people's ego charts. So we will be dealing with that aspect as well when we come to find the ego chart. So before we enter into giving your healing words power potential, there is required an approach to sort out the ego chart and how it has brought about certain traits that have altered the divine blueprint and caused a break in the etheric body. Once more, we need to revisit the centres to ask some questions. So that's going to be on part 3, and I'll bring this one to a conclusion. So it'll be worthwhile listening to this after you've done the previous meditation, before we move on to find the ego child itself.